that, and that works out to about $32,500 a year, which is about a 6.5% payment based on the lump sum of the value of the lump sum. So you always got to compare it back to the cash, because if you took the cash, you would always have that money, and you could just pay yourself out $32,000 a year instead of waiting for them to pay it. Now, one of the things to definitely keep in mind is your family situation. Now, it turns out that we talked a little bit, and he has a spouse, and he has 2 kids, but because he's 62, they're grown and they have their own kids and they've got their own jobs and are doing okay. So they don't necessarily need his money, but it probably would be nice, or maybe he could set up something where it goes to the grandkids and even skips his kids, and that could be very nice for them. So that's something to think about. Another thing to really think about is, what is your life expectancy going to be? When you're 62, or matter of fact, I guess when you're any age, it's hard to know how long you're going to live. It's generally based on 3 primary factors. One is your general health. If you happen to know that you have cancer, oh my gosh, that makes the decision really easy. Take the $500,000, because if they're going to pay you $32,000 a year and you're only going to live 5 or 8 or 10 years, take the money. It's going to be in the best interest of your spouse and your kids and your grandkids. If you're in great health and everyone in your family tends to live a very long time and you eat right, well, then maybe you're going to outlive the odds and do really well. So having $32,000 of guaranteed cash flow is going to be really cool. The other thing, of course, that determines your life expectancy beyond genetics and your general health and exercise is random luck. Sometimes things happen to people that are unexpected, and if you are taking the annual payout, you need to know in this program, do you get some final amount? Does your spouse get something? And we talked at length about that, and the best of we could figure out from reading the contract offer is that when he dies, his spouse gets nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, he was at 62, so at the age of 62, what is your probability? Life expectancy charts would predict that at 62 you're going to live 20 years, but he might not, and his wife would be without this income flow, which, they don't really need, but it would sure make life a lot easier to have a couple extra $1,000 a month. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. So we have a lot of things to decide here. Now, one of the things that you can figure out, of course, mathematically, is that if the payout is 6.5%, if you could make an overall portfolio that earns about 6.5%, then, every year you take out 6.5% and the portfolio makes about 6.5%. You could do that for pretty much in perpetuity. Of course, it'd be better if you could make a little bit more than 6.5%. The stock market historically makes 10, but you may want to have some of this money in what I call the cushion, where it's more conservatively invested. And so you might have a hard time getting a blend, but if you don't really need the money, the vast majority of it could be in the stock market, and if the market goes down, well, maybe you just skip that year. Again, it depends on what your needs are. So if you really need this money and you put a good chunk of it, let's say half of it, in the stock market making, in bonds making 3%, and half of it in the stock market making 10%, you would expect an average return of 6.5%. So it's doable. But even if you could only get 6% or wanted to be even more conservative, now if you only made 6%, what would happen is you're slowly taking out a little bit more than what you're making. And I did a quick estimation here, is that money would run out, if he started at the age of 62, it would run out about the age of 98. And again, in their situation, they have other funds, they have other investments, so they could pull from one place or another. Odds are that one of them, and probably both of them, will not be alive at the age of 98. So not only would they be able to get all the money they wanted and expected every year, they would probably have money left over because they took the $500,000 in cash. Now, because of their situation, I think they can take a little more risk and probably make, over the next 20 to 30 years, if they were to live that long, more than the 6.5% that the fund is paying out. And because of the risk of death, you can keep the money. So I went with the position of taking the lump sum and cleverly investing it. Of course, I have to keep in mind, and I had to tell them, and I'm going to tell you, that there's a potential conflict with that advice because they're a client of mine, and I know that if they hire me, I make more money. So that doesn't necessarily make it wrong, but it's something, we always need to think about. How is someone getting paid when they give you a piece of advice? So keep that in mind pretty much all the time, but just wanted to make sure that we discuss that here. So that's a way you can look at a possible lump sum payment if you're pushing retirement versus an annuity payment. If the annuity payment is 3 or 4%, especially if it's not indexed for inflation, it's real easy. You take the lump sum and you invest it because it's pretty easy to beat 3 or 4% in the long run. If it's 7, 8, 9, 10%, 10% would be really great. I've seen those, especially if it's 10% and it's adjusted for inflation. Unless there's some medical concern, my bias would be to start with planning on taking the annual contribution because it's a lot of money, and it's 10% is a generous amount. Or you could look at it that the lump sum that they're offering is a shitty amount, but potato. So that's something to look at. If you have a situation like that yourself, of course, you can always contact me, Phil at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com. So what we'll do is we'll take our little commercial break and we'll go into our interview with Ian and talk all about Sunday Assembly.
Here's an excerpt from The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons, by David Fitzgerald.
Although the church does not disclose its finances, it has long been widely recognized as the wealthiest church per capita in America. Time magazine put the church's total assets at a minimum of $30 billion in 1997. In their 1999 book, Mormon America, investigative journalists Richard and Joan K. Osling conservatively estimated church assets at least $25 to $30 billion, adding it was likely well beyond that. The church criticized these numbers as excessive, but without offering any hint of what the real figures might be. The church's financial growth is fueled by sacred taxation, i.e., tithing. To be in good standing, all faithful Mormons must tithe, that is, give 10% of their gross, not net, income to the church. And it's not unheard of for Mormons to pay a double tithe. The Osling's research concluded that as of the mid-1990s, annual tithing revenue was likely between $4.25 and $5.3 billion. That's billion with a B, not an M, annually. The Oslings also found that in addition, the church also owns a surprisingly large amount of lucrative commercial investments, managed mostly through its Deseret Management Corporation. These holdings bring in another estimated $600 million annually. They include an estimated $6 billion or more in stock and bonds, several insurance companies including Beneficial Life, a company with $16 billion in insurance and assets of $1.6 billion, media holdings including Bonneville International Corporations, which owns a chain of 25 radio stations, 7th largest in the country, a television station, and other media operations. Hawaii Reserves, which manages extensive real estate developments in Hawaii, such as the Disney-esque tourist trap, Polynesian Cultural Center, the major source of PCC's labor force, Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and more than 150 farms and ranches, including the largest cattle ranch in America, making the LDS Church one of the biggest landowners of the nation, with around 1 million acres of farm and ranch land, roughly equal to the size of the state of Delaware. Incidentally, the church's religious buildings and property, like the magnificent Salt Lake City Temple, are considered expenses and not sources of revenue. A big focus of church funds is on their humanitarian efforts. Every year, tens of millions of dollars are donated to carry out outreach activities in 178 countries, which also happen to contribute to church growth. And like many religions, it claims to be the fastest growing religious sect in the world. But where did this tax-exempt multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation come from?
The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons, by David Fitzgerald, is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, this is the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show. Like we talked about a little earlier, I just got back from a week in California, and one of the things that I did, I guess my last full day there, Sunday morning, I went to the monthly meeting of the Los Angeles Sunday Assembly, and now I have the great pleasure of introducing Ian Dodd. He is the founder and until recently one of the co-directors of Sunday Assembly Los Angeles. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing great, Phil. Thanks. It was great to catch up with you when you were here in Southern California.
Oh, it was great fun, and of course, I'm assuming you know that Sunday Assembly was the big reason that I came all the way from Champaign, Illinois, out to Los Angeles.
Well, I heard there were a few other events on your itinerary, but we were honored to have you come put on a special skeptical investing event for a Sunday evening. But I was genuinely surprised when I turned around and saw you turn up at Sunday Assembly on that morning.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I travel, I actually, even on vacation, I try to find out if there's anything going on locally. Matter of fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, we spent the Christmas holiday in Death Valley. We landed in Las Vegas, went to Death Valley for 3 days, and then came down through L.A., and I think we happened to meet up for a dinner meeting. I think it was a day or two before Christmas, their little Christmas party with inland atheists several years ago. Just happened to be having a meeting as we were in town, so we stopped in and said hello, and of course, meet good friends. And the Sunday Assembly, the one I went to was over 100 people, but you've told me that it's normally bigger.
Yeah, we had about 140 people there this week when you were one of our guests. That's the smallest one we've had in the last several months, partly because it was Mother's Day, partly because we're moving into the summer season. Typically, we get between 160 and 190 people.
That is quite a crowd, and of course, anyone who's never been to Sunday Assembly, I guess, go ahead and describe what the service, is it a service? Is that even a fair word? What's program?
Well, we refer to it as the Assembly or the program.
The Assembly. Why don't you give us a quick walkthrough of what it entails and
Sure.
maybe even specifics for that Sunday, and I'll chime in when I feel like it.
Yeah, well, for anybody who's been to a church service, anybody who grew up in a religious background, it may sound a little familiar. Sanderson Jones, the founder of Sunday Assembly in London, likes to describe it as all the best bits of church, but without the religion and awesome pop songs. So basically, people come in, we give them a good welcome. First thing we do is start off with some communal singing. We get our musician up there, in this case with a few members of our community to sort of serve as an adjunct choir. We get people up and moving and singing fun songs, because the science has shown that that sort of activity is actually really good for you on a lot of levels. We have what we call the short performance, which in this case, this last Sunday, was a comedy sketch by Sheila Ratner. And then we have our main speaker, because obviously we don't have a preacher, a pastor, or a sermon. So what we do is we invite in special guests to speak about their area of expertise and passion. It could be a theoretical physicist, could be an experimental psychologist, could be an environmental activist. This last Sunday, it was a gentleman by the name of Robert Eggers, who's done a tremendous amount of work in the nonprofit world of building sustainable models of food preparation and distribution for homeless people, and employing foster kids and ex-cons and other sort of down on their luck folks, train them and make them employable in the food industries. There's a few moments of meditation, and there's obviously a collection, because we are a donation-funded and volunteer-driven organization. And unlike churches, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We do file a Form 990 form with the IRS, which means that all of our finances are entirely transparent, unlike churches. And then we break for